Parashat Tavo. There's a quiet strangeness at the opening of this week's parsha. A farmer, having worked his land and gathered its ripe fruit, carries a basket of it to the temple in act of thanksgiving. And at the very summit of his achievement, the produce of his own soil, his own labor, his own patient seasons of sun and rain, the Torah does not let him say what you might expect. It puts in his mouth, instead, a story that begins in homelessness. Arami Oved Avi. He must declare, my father was a wandering Aramean. Before he may thank God for the harvest in his hands, he must rehearse the whole descent that had preceded it. An ancestor with no land, a family gone down to Egypt, few in number. A people enslaved, a cry, a rescue, and only then, at the end of the entire recitation, the fruit itself. The moment of plenty is narrated entirely through the memory of lack. Why? It is in the grammar itself that the commentators found their answers. Ibn Ezra, reading Oved as an intransitive verb, understands the farmer to be saying something almost confessional. My father was a perishing Aramean, poor, without means, so that I did not inherit the land from my father. Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch sharpens it further. The word Aramean, he writes, expresses the most complete contrast to the happy, blessed independence in one's own land. The ancestor was homeless in the very homeland in which his descendants now enjoy. He had to consider it an act of grace to be granted so much as a grave. Sfono says plainly, Jacob was a wandering, lost person without a home of his own. 3 readings, 1 insight. The declaration is engineered to say, this was never mine by right. And that is the difficulty worth pausing over. We can understand a person thanking God at the moment of rescue, ensuring relief of danger survived. But this is not that moment. This is a moment of security, comfort, arrival. Why does the Torah insist that a man must interrupt his own success to remember that he once had nothing? The Rambam points us towards an answer. The first fruit ceremony, he writes in the Guide to the Perplexed, exists to create humility. For it is to be feared that those who become great in riches and comfort might, as it is generally the case, fall into vices of insolence and haughtiness. He's pointing us to a warning sounded earlier in Deuteronomy, one of the most pierced in the entire Torah. When you have eaten your fill and built fine houses, and your silver and gold have multiplied, beware lest your heart grows haughty, and you say to yourself, my own power and the might of my own hand have won me this wealth. Here then is a real question. Adversity we understand as a trial. Why should abundance be the greater danger? Modern psychology has given this mechanism a name. It called it hedonistic adaptation, the settled human tendency to grow accustomed to whatever we have, so that yesterday's gift becomes today's assumption and tomorrow's entitlement. The new house, once marveled, becomes merely a place we live. The harvest, once a miracle, becomes simply what the field owes us. What we received as a blessing is quietly reclassified as expectation, and gratitude has nothing left to notice. The most careful demonstration of this came from psychologist Robert Emmons of the University of California, Davis, working with Michael McConnell in a series of experiments published in 2003. They asked people to keep a weekly record. Some listed their burdens, some listed their blessings, and some simply noted events. Those who deliberately recorded their blessings became measurably happier, more hopeful, and even physically better rested. The finding is quietly devastating in its implication. Gratitude is not the natural automatic response to good fortune. Left to itself, abundance creates not thankfulness, but adaptation. Gratitude has to be practiced, chosen, rehearsed, actively constructed, or it does not reliably come at all. Emmons defines it as a discipline with 2 movements: affirming the goodness of one's life and recognizing that its source lies, at least in part, outside of oneself. Gratitude must be built, not merely felt. What then is a farmer being asked to do when he stands there with his basket? Not in the first place to do anything. He's being made to say something, aloud, on a fixed day, in fixed words, with the fruit still in his hands. The declaration of Bikurim. Bikurim, the first ripe fruit, is a practice built with a precision that modern research only helps us to see more clearly. It plants the memory of lack in the precise moment lack is most likely to be forgotten. The hour of the harvest, when the heart is readiest to say, "My own hands had made me this." It runs deliberately against the current of the prosperous soul. And it does exactly what Emmons describes, affirming the good, the land flowing with milk and honey, and in the same breath, locating its source beyond the self. The land that the Lord swore to our grandfathers to give us, and the feeling that Torah understands cannot be trusted to arrive on its own. That is the difference. The whole ceremony is built to teach the difference between receiving the world as a gift and receiving it as entitlement. There are two ways of holding the very same basket. Entitlement is a slow disease of the settled and comfortable, those who have had good things for long enough to forget that they were ever given. Gratitude is a discipline of those who remember they were once strangers, once slaves, once few. And the memory is not incidental to gratitude. It is the very engine. You cannot be thankful for what you're convinced you are owed. Only by re-narrating the gift as once absent, "My father was a perishing homeless, was nothing," can the farmer feel the land beneath his feet as grace rather than a due. Notice too who stands beside him as he speaks. "You shall rejoice," the verse continues, "in all the good you and the Levite and the stranger in your midst." The Levite who owns no land, the stranger who has no portion. Gratitude that remembers its own homelessnesses cannot turn inward and hoard. It looks around and sees others who are now where we once were, and it makes room for them at the table. That is hakarat hatov, the recognition of the good, not a warm private feeling, but a moral act with consequences for how we treat the person who has less. This matters far beyond the harvest festival. No civilization in history has been more prosperous than ours, and by many measures, few have been less grateful. We were told that affluence will content us. Instead, it had made us, in many ways, more anxious, more aggravated, more persuaded that we are owed. The politics of our time is increasingly the politics of grievance, of entitlement disappointed, of the sense that someone somewhere has withheld what was rightfully ours. The Torah, with astonishing foresight, locates the danger exactly here. The great threat to a free, comfortable people was never that they would suffer. It was that they would forget. Forget the wandering, forget the gift, forget the giver, and mistake the harvest for an achievement rather than a grace. This is why, later in the parsha, the catastrophe of the curses is traced not to dramatic apostasy, but to something that sounds almost gentle. Because you did not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness in your heart, out of the abundance of all things. Joylessness amid plenty. The failure precisely of gratitude. A nation can possess everything and give thanks for nothing. And that, hollowing out itself, is the beginning of the unraveling. Which is why Judaism never leaves gratitude to chance. It is not assumed, not awaited, not hoped for. It is taught to children, rehearsed with fixed words, handed down across the generations, because the people can lose it entirely in a single comfortable generation that was never taught to remember. The farmer sets his basket down at the altar and bows. In that small movement, something quietly enormous has happened. The possessions have turned back into a gift, and that is the teaching. By one remembered story, one basket set down, one heart taught to see what it holds as grace, we bridge the gap from the world that is to the world that ought to be. Shabbat Shalom.